I've got a problem with my Miller welder. And I know I've ranted and raved about this machine and how great it is and how it never lets me down. Never have problems with it. Keep it clean. Flawless machine. It's beautiful. That made a little rhyme there too. But I've had a problem with it. I've got it figured out, kind of figured out. It's taken me 2 days to figure it out though. Mainly because I didn't just go out and buy a part and throw a part at it. I wanted to actually know what was wrong. The problem was that the wire had let off the trigger and the wire would keep feeding. It wouldn't stop. And you hit the trigger on and off and the wire would kind of hesitate, but it would always feed. It would always want to weld. So I figured out tentatively what the problem is, and I'm going to see if I'm right. Hang out for a minute. Started out a couple days ago when I went to fix my plow bucket, my snow plow bucket on my tractor. I needed to add a couple supports to strengthen it up so it wouldn't fold in the one end. It should only take me maybe an hour to make the supports and weld them on total. But that was 2 days ago and I just got it done. What was happening every time I'd pull this trigger to start up, now when I'd turn the machine on, it'd be fine. As soon as I pulled this trigger once, it would start welding. I'd let go of the trigger, it would keep feeding wire. And if you touched it to whatever, it would weld. It did not want to stop welding. Automatically, I think, well, this machine's, I don't know, 10 years old. Maybe a little bit more, maybe 12 years old. Never replaced this button. I've never replaced this hose, this line set. So I'm thinking maybe the button's bad. I take the button out. If you twist the top on this particular thing, this top piece comes off. And then you can pull the button out. And then the wires right there. I take the button out of my welder. You have 2 wires here. I connect my multimeter to it, set it to ohms. Pull the trigger and let go. It's working just fine. It ohms out every time. On and off, on and off. No matter how many times I do it, it never stays on. So it's not the button. I can't get it to malfunction, it can't be the button. The next thing I look at is the wire. So I take and I hook the button back up, put it on these 2 wires again, and take my multimeter and I hook it to this side. 1 on each side of the wires. There's 2 wires in there. And this is the part that connects into the welder. Oh. After I hook my multimeter up here, I pull the trigger. Every time I pull the trigger, it ohms out just fine. Well, I guess it can't be the wire then. Because the wire, I mean, if the button's not malfunctioning, and I'm ohming out the wire, and it's not malfunctioning, okay, it's not the wire. Maybe it's the machine. This is where that wire connects to the machine. You got 2 wires in there. The easy way to test this is to take a piece of wire and bridge that gap with the welder turned on and running. If you bridge that gap, it's just like pulling the trigger. So I take a piece of wire, I turn the machine on, turn my generator on, and I bridge that. And every time I bridge it and pull the wire back out of one side, it's on and off, on and off, on and off. Well, now it's not the machine. So it's not the trigger, it's not the wire, and it's not the machine. Well, those are the only 3 components in pulling that trigger and making the wire feed. I don't get it. I'm lost at this point. I'm thinking about everything I possibly can. Nothing comes to mind. There's no way I can really troubleshoot this. So I get a bright idea. Maybe I've got another welder in the back. I've got another Miller welder. It's a 220 welder, and this generator that I have it doesn't have the right plug, and it doesn't have enough amperage to run a 220 30 amp machine. So I can't hook that machine up. I'd have to transfer the wire over, the gas over, everything, but I can't even hook it up to my generator, so I can't use that machine. But I get the line set off of it. It happens to have the same end. It's an older machine, a lot older. I bought that one back in the 90s, but it's got the same end right here. O-rings are spaced the same. It's slightly different in the tip here, but the diameter is the same. Grab that one, take it off that machine, put it on this machine. Everything works fine. Must be a flaw somewhere in this. Somewhere inside this, there's a flaw that I can't seem to find with a multimeter. Now, the normal person at this point, well, you buy another line set. It's bad. Something in it's gone bad. Order another line set. If you live in the city, you run down your welding supply store, buy another line for it. I found them on Amazon for 75 bucks. You buy them at the Miller store, 250, 200, depending on your welder. It all depends on your welder, how long this is, how long you want to get your cable. This one's 10 foot standard, 10-foot line set. So you can get a pretty good range, but say it's a Sunday and your welding supply store is not open and you got to weld something. You got to get something going on your tractor or your car or whatever. You want to get a project done. So this doesn't suit me. I've got to know what's wrong with something. Even if I buy another line, I've got to figure out what's wrong with this. Why did it go bad? It might help keep this next one that I buy from going bad so fast if it's something I can keep an eye on. So I'm going to take this apart and I'm going to see if I can figure out where in this line it's gone bad. So one of the first things I did is I was looking through this hole where the trigger goes, and I could see a little bit of bare metal here where these wires are kind of wrapped up in there. Figured, well, maybe it's arcing off of that, somehow getting power or grounding out. Maybe that's what's doing it. So I took some shrink wrap and I put it around these wire ends, because these are normally just plain metal wire ends. Put shrink wrap around those, and I wrapped some electrical tape around some of this bare metal here. Put it all back together, stuck it back on the machine. Nope, still does it. I go to the other end. The wire that's coming out of this hose hooks into the welder. This particular one has a piece of rubber here you can pull back. And now you can see this wire goes up in here, connects up, kind of tucks up in there. And this wire that connects up at both ends, it actually goes through, it's underneath this solid piece. It just comes out at each end so you can plug it into the switch and plug it into the welder. And I'm noticing something as I'm looking at it. Number one, it's got some connections here, but we've already ohmed out the wire, and we know that it's a solid connection. But if you can see, there's some wire, some shielding wire wrapped around. Let's see if I can get some of that off of there. Got this crazy tape all the way around it. See that shielding wire? It's connected up there. It's not connected there. Hopefully you can see that. Now this isn't a ground. This is shielding wire. Your ground is a whole separate plug in the welder. So don't mistake this for a ground of any sort. And I'm thinking that without that shielding there, these wires are somehow getting fed power by the welder, by the main part. I'm going to test that theory. What I ended up doing is pulling them, taking some of the tape loose and pulling these wires back away from that shielding where it was frayed, back to where the shielding was still intact, and then wrapping this with electrical tape. Now, electrical tape isn't the same as shielding. If you have a shielded wire, it needs the shielding there for a reason. But this did work because it got the wires back to where the shielding was intact. This now works, no problem. I wish I could, well, I probably could show you that it works, but the generator's pretty loud, and sitting next to it while it's going off just doesn't make for a fun video. But this does work now. It works just fine. Every time I pull the trigger and let off, the wire starts and stops, no problem. That was the problem, that shield for that main wire where all the amperage goes through the center. That was feeding the power wire to the trigger with enough power to keep that trigger going, keep the machine going, make it think that you were pulling the trigger. So if you happen to have this problem, you can do this if it's a Sunday and you can't get parts. But I wouldn't suggest doing this and leaving it this way. Because most of those wires up there for that shield, they're frayed, they're gone. I would say a third of them around that side were gone. You need to replace it. It needs to be replaced and intact. Like I said, this welder's, shoot, I'd say it's probably at least 10 years old, maybe 12, 13 years old. I've never replaced this before, and I take pretty good care of my welders. I do use it a lot, so it gets a lot of use. This isn't something that's just going to go bad from sitting. This is a lot of bending. Also, in my other video, I tell people, as this comes out of the welder, this hangs, right? The connection I have on there, the other lead from my other welder, this is hard plastic, and then it's got a piece of spring wrapped around so it can't kink as easy, but it still will over time. Gravity will work and it will kink. So this kink, even with this, I'll pull this through here a little bit. Even with this thick rubber on here, all the way up where it's supposed to be, it can still kink, and over time, it's going to be that way. This wire hanging down. And then you move it to weld, and then drop it, or set it down. Don't drop your welder. You set it down, you pick it up, you set it down. It frays those wires in there. So I hope you liked the video, guys. If you have the problem with your welder where it keeps feeding wire, check that. Check your button. Do all the same tests that I already did. And then go and check the shielding on it. See if that's feeding it power. Until next time, guys, go make something.